Speculative fiction is a term to me that is not easy to define. It encompasses not just science fiction, but fantasy as well, and the many subgenres as well under both of those, like paranormal fantasy, epic fantasy, and blends like science fiction and horror, science fiction and fantasy, science fiction and romance, and science fiction and mystery that are discussed in Chapter 7 of the Reader's Guide, Advisory Guide to Genre Blends. Chapter also discusses the appeal of science fiction and how it is an imaginative genre that in which authors can take a single concept and go in infinite directions. I believe that's also true of fantasy. It also talks about one of the key elements of science fiction being characters that readers can relate to. I believe that's also true in the other genres, not just science fiction or fantasy. I think you have to have characters in all of them, whether it's romance, contemporary, young adult, paranormal, the fantasy, sci-fi, they have to be relatable, or the story could be a good story, but if the characters are not relatable, then they may turn the reader off. I do have to admit, though, I do not like Star Wars. I think the only movie I've really seen of the Star Wars movies is The Empire Strikes Back. I do admit, though, I am a fan of the new Star Trek movies, but that's about as far as my liking of the science fiction as far as speculative fiction goes. I'm more of a fantasy person. My work falls under the fantasy umbrella of speculative fiction. I write epic and urban fantasy, paranormal, and most recently young adult fantasy and paranormal. One thing I did like is the blog post by Melinda Lowe talking about the 5 foundations of world building. I love to do world building with my fantasy stories. She talks about the 5 issues that the authors need to focus on, which is that will serve as the foundation of the world, is the rules, rituals, power, place, and food. I agree it is a good idea to focus on those 5, but also I focus on, as a writer, the races of the people, the weapons, transportation, and languages. So I have a little more of a list than she talks about as far as being fantasy. That's the one thing I love about it, is because then I love creating the world and seeing it unfold as I create the characters and the rules and the rituals and the power, and creating that world that one day readers will even love as much as I loved creating the world.